Hi, I'm Marci Kobayashi, and I'm back again with another excerpt from Finding Yoyu. And if you've been following along, then you know that in the last excerpt, we had just gotten Oto-san evaluated and found out that he had Alzheimer's, and that was, of course, devastating and a little bit of a relief, too, to finally know what was happening with him. But at that time, there was something even more difficult in the background that was happening for all of us, and I wanted to share about that today. It's about Fuku-chan, and I hope I do her justice. Here we go. Fuku-chan was the sweetest, gentlest Shiba dog. She had joined Oto-san and Okasan's life the year before when one of the neighboring families found her in the woods. This sweet Shiba dog with the big smile had been living on the park grounds up the road from the Kobayashi house. She was nursing puppies, and though no one knew for sure, some guessed that she had been dumped because of it. The puppies found new homes right away, and Fuku-chan was brought to the Kobayashi house because everyone in the area knew Oto-san and Okasan were in mourning. Their dog had recently been hit by a car. Oto-san and Okasan fell in love with Fuku-chan instantly. We all did. Okasan had always had a dog, and Fuku-chan filled a gaping hole in her heart. When we brought Okasan and Oto-san to Tokyo, we asked the neighbors to temporarily take Fuku-chan until we could figure out what to do. They knew Fuku-chan's story and were super accommodating. Our condominium in Tokyo didn't allow pets, and we were secretly hoping the neighbors would love Fuku-chan's gentle nature as much as we did. We were hoping they would agree to keep her. To everyone's astonishment, Fuku-chan stopped being gentle. She barked and whined, scratched the car, and even ran away one time. I was angry with myself when I heard the news. Back in January, when we left Fuku-chan with the neighbors, I had planned on contacting an animal healer and communicator. I wanted Fuku-chan to know what was happening and that she would be okay. I had procrastinated, and by the time the neighbors called us in March, they were fed up and didn't want to keep her. Why would such a loving, gentle soul lash out in that way? I was troubled by Fuku-chan's reaction. It made us doubt the neighbors and think dark thoughts about them. Those thoughts were irrational because the neighbors were good people who loved dogs and who the family had known for years. Still, Fuku-chan was reacting violently to her new environment, and we had to do something. By chance, I shared the story with one of my friends here in Tokyo. She immediately contacted a shelter she knew about in Kanagawa. After hearing our predicament, the head of the shelter agreed to try and find a new home for Fuku-chan. The shelter called back a few days later to let us know they had a family ready and waiting. It was a 3-generation family living in a large home. All we had to do was get Fuku-chan there. Fortunately, Akira still had a few days before the new school year started. He decided to make a quick trip back to Hiroshima with Oto-san. He wanted to check on the family house, file paperwork with the city regarding his parents' move to Tokyo, and most importantly, to pick up Fuku-chan. I stayed in Tokyo with Okasan. Rather than making the drive in one go, I wanted Akira and Oto-san to stay overnight somewhere along the way. Driving that many hours straight was not safe, and besides, Akira wasn't thinking about everything that had to be done once you arrived. Since no one had been living at the house for 3 months, they wouldn't be able to walk in and flop down in front of the TV. First, they had to turn on the lights, open the outside shutters, open the windows, sweep up the stink bugs, and turn on the water. Fortunately, because they had slept for a few hours in the middle of the night at a rest stop, they ended up arriving at the family house in Hiroshima early in the morning. I was relieved when Akira called to let me know they had arrived safely. Aside from their midnight nap, Oto-san had stayed awake for the entire 13-hour drive. Though they stopped for breaks along the way, being in the car for so many hours was a drain. Akira moved around the house, opening curtains and windows as we talked. It was a sunny day, perfect for airing out the house. We were discussing the to-do list when I heard Oto-san hollering in the background. Akira went to check on him while I stayed on the line. Oto-san sounded agitated and scared. He was hollering for Akira to come quickly because the toilet was flooding the house. Akira was angry and yelling back at him to touch the floor. It made no sense, so I hung up and waited for Akira to call back. About 10 minutes later, Akira called again. Evidently, Otosan had been hallucinating. He was convinced that water was running down the bathroom wall, across the floor, down the hall, and out the front door. Akira somehow convinced him that everything was okay by wiping the floor with dry toilet paper and showing him that the paper was not wet. Otosan calmed down and finally went out to the garage where all his old farm equipment was stored. The long drive must have affected Otosan after all. Akira was so frustrated and tired. I could hear in his voice that he had no patience for his father, and I wondered how they would make it through the rest of the trip. I wished I had gone with them to be a buffer, and at the same time I was glad I had not. I felt sorry for Otosan's distress and Akira's frustration, but was grateful for the episode. It confirmed the doctor's diagnosis. Something was seriously not right with Otosan. Earlier in the year, when Otosan got lost and drove into a rice field, it convinced us that we were right to bring him to Tokyo. Even so, Akira and his brother had been toying with an idea. The brothers were thinking of allowing their father to stay in Hiroshima on his own during the warmer months. Surely he would be okay, even considering his recent diagnosis. His Alzheimer's wasn't that bad, was it? At the very least, they could arrange for meals to be delivered so that Otosan wouldn't have to drive. Otosan would be happier tinkering in his garage and walking his property than watching TV all day in Tokyo. However, after observing his hallucination firsthand, any thought about allowing Otosan to stay in Hiroshima on his own was immediately and completely erased from Akira's mind. I was relieved and grateful. The rest of their trip was smooth. Otosan didn't have any more hallucinations and spent most of his time in the garage or sleeping. Akira ran errands and on the last day closed up the house again. On their way down the mountain and out of town, Akira and Otosan stopped by the neighbor's house to get Fuku-chan. She jumped into the back seat without hesitation and sat quietly for the long drive. At the rest stops, Akira took videos of her together with Otosan, and we marveled at how happy she seemed. When Akira and Otosan took Fuku-chan into the shelter in Kanagawa, she wagged her tail and happily followed the volunteer into the back. Her new family would be able to pick her up in a few days after she had a full medical check. We were broken-hearted and relieved at the same time. We don't talk about it much, but leaving Fuku-chan was probably the hardest thing about moving Okasan and Otosan to Tokyo. I felt like we had failed her even though we found her a new home. In Japanese, fuku means good luck or good fortune. You'll often see it combined with another character to mean happiness, or kofuku in Japanese. That gentle Shiba dog that Okasan named Fuku-chan carried so much light and joy with her. I knew her light and joy were not something any of her human friends could take credit for. It was hers, and she gave it generously. Saying goodbye to Fuku-chan made me feel like we were losing a bit of light and joy. It closed the door on one chapter and made this new stage of living together suddenly all too real. There was no more going back. Okay, that's all for today. And we never did get to hear anything more about Fuku-chan and her new family, but I trust that she's okay and they're happy with her. So that's all, and I will be back again next week with the next section. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.